各位观众朋友，大家好，欢迎收看我们美南新闻。今天还是很荣幸的请到了我们 金诺威来跟我们一起讨论中美关系以及时事评论。How are you doing, Jim?
I'm doing very well. I'm here with you.
Thank you. I look forward to this.
I'm doing even better. I'm speaking to some of my friends in Houston and throughout the world, and in China too, I hope.
Staying home during this pandemic is not easy, but we have to make do. So I'm glad that we're still plugged in. We're still know what's going on. And what we spoke about last week resonated deeply into the community. And there was some discussion. And I think it is, what you brought up also is that if we really want to understand this conflict, that you could tell us, our audiences, a little bit about the difference in the governance models that the U.S. and China, the difference between the two countries, how they use it in their foreign affairs, and how that is really the root of our current conflicts.
Yeah, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it, because I think what we all want is a successful world where each country supports the goals and efforts of every other country for collective benefit, starting with international trade, which benefits everyone, increases prosperity, etc. And as an American, and as somebody who spent a great deal of time outside the United States, including in China quite a bit, I find the reasons for our current conflict to be based upon how we come from very different perspectives, different histories, different social goals, different government systems, etc. And so I think the best way to understand somebody is to communicate with them and try to understand where they're coming from. And in the United States, particularly in the last 100 years or so, the United States has grown significantly in many, many ways, grown demographically, grown economically, and has been engaged in the world in an ever-expanding way. Very, very importantly, in the middle of the 20th century, the U.S. was engaged. It was attacked in Honolulu by the Japanese, and it had Germany declare war on it the very next day. Meanwhile, U.S. diplomats had tried to understand what happened in World War I and tried to prevent another great war. So the United States was successful in fighting the European front and fighting the Pacific front. And in the main, after World War II, spent a great deal of time and effort trying to build international institutions.
Jim, this is uncanny. We don't rehearse our shows. We don't have a script. That's what makes this really unique, right? Yeah. We're really chatting as old friends. Yeah. I want to hear his perspective and listen to mine. Doesn't mean we're right or wrong. This is our perspective. Mm-hmm. But for you to bring up World War II, for you to bring up Japanese invasion, it's uncanny, because for Chinese people around the world, whether they're Chinese American or China Chinese American, or Chinese China Chinese, or Taiwan or Hong Kong or Singapore, there's Chinese all over the world. Sure. The common theme, I guess maybe except Taiwan now, is World War II, because the effects of World War II are still felt, right? Families being torn apart, the Japanese imperialism, their brutality. What Japanese are to the Chinese are what the Nazis are to the Jews. We were exterminated. For you to bring this up is very interesting, because I didn't know you were going to say that. For you to bring it up, it really hits a chord. But I need to tell our audience what you just said.
Okay, go right ahead.
我们今天这一集呢，因为我们上一集谈到的事情，我们这个有些回想。那我跟 Jim 有刚刚谈了一下，说要讲什么。Jim 就说他想跟观众了解，让观众了解这个中美关系的问题，基本上就是为这两国对于外交的这个 governance， 这个怎么样去交涉，怎么样去谈判，跟各两个国家的立场本身就是很不同，来解释给我们这个不同在哪里。然后很绝的也是他提到说，这个美国本身这个外交系统跟他的这个体制跟制度，是从第二次世界大战他就开始提到21世纪1940年代这个日本侵略珍珠港开始， 然后那时候美国还在想了解第一次世界大战的时候发生了什么事情，所以那时候还没有回过神，所以他们那时候并没有一个很明确的方式。在这之前，美国其实很少有这个干预别的国家的政治的。那他刚刚也讲了说，这个美国跟这个别的一些西方国家也不一样。So see, I went back to what you said earlier about U.S. being the perspectives are different. That of course it's going to be different because different governments, different goals, right? Every country has their own goals to benefit their own citizens or their own administration. But I really would say that U.S. has more similarities, let's say with Australia or with European countries, Western European countries, because they're more mature democracies and they're more came from British origins, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, but when we look at, let's say, countries that are newer democracies or not democracies that are still coming out of being a third world country or poverty or war because the effects of World War II is still felt in a lot of countries. Some never could recover. And the tug of war after World War II, the Cold War, it affected a lot of Asian countries. So what I'm saying is that U.S. is similar to a lot of Western countries, but our perspective does not apply to a lot of countries that doesn't have the foundation to support our governance the way we govern. I mean, we have a lot of failures. So look at Vietnam, look at Afghanistan, look at Iraq. But that's a little off topic. Let me go back and continue what you were saying about starting in World War II, middle of 20th century, what Japan did, the perilous Japan did, and how we grew from there. Go ahead.
So after World War II, the United States, even though it had been attacked both by Germany and by Japan, it endeavored to rebuild not only their economies, but to rebuild their constitutions, their governments, their social structure, and their entire demography. And they did it, the United States, my father's generation, they called it the greatest generation. They did it with the objective of thinking that the world would be stronger if everyone grew together and grew along their own cultural and economic lines, rather than having one country. Historically, over time, winners of wars have always sought to dominate the losers of wars. The United States' philosophy was exactly the opposite. It wanted to rebuild the people who it had recently defeated. And it did that directly within their countries. And it also did it through the creation of a number of large global institutions, starting with the United Nations. Also, because of problems in Eastern Europe after the war, it created NATO. The Bretton Woods Agreement created the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to help with credit and rebuilding. And throughout the 1950s, the 1960s, even with the advent of the Cold War between the United States and Russia, the world prospered. It prospered tremendously. And in 1972, even though the United States and China had barely had relations post-World War II, before 1972, the United States, President Nixon went to visit Chou Enlai, and they opened the relationship with China, and we began together to flourish. The other thing the United States did in the 70s and the 1980s was to decide that the United States domestic market was very large commercially, and the United States citizens were prospering, and they were creating the demand for all kinds of industrial and commercial goods.
Meanwhile, I gotta kind of ask you. See, this is starting from there. We could agree on the changes in foreign policy starting in World War II.
Yeah.
But see perspectives, right? As an American, we both all our ancestors came from other countries. Yours, Europe, mine, Asia. But there's a time frame where some came earlier, some come later. Unless you're Apache or Comanche, we talked about this before. All Americans are immigrants. But because of when our parents came or our ancestors came, see the perspective, right? You said that U.S. prospered, Nixon reached out, see, but to the other countries in Asia at that time that fought with U.S., the ally with United States is the Republic of China, Taiwan. They're the ones that bled with the U.S., with England, with France, against Japan and Nazi Germany. We had a pact. We have agreements, legally binding international contracts. But Nixon went around the back of a member of this coalition, made a deal with the enemy, with Communist China, stabbed Republic of China, Taiwan in the back, and abandoned them 20 years after we fought in the World War II. They also rebuilt Japan. Not because, even though Japan is imperial, they rebuilt Japan in order to use Japan as a front line against the communist Russia's influence, just like how Korean War started. Vietnam War started. You see what I mean? I'm not refuting what you're saying. I'm saying, see, the perspectives are so different. To me, what we did in Korea and Vietnam and Japan and Taiwan and China, that's not mutually beneficial. The only people that died are Vietnamese and Koreans that are used as pawns. See, I'm very worked up when I talk about this, but I get it. We have to fight those wars. We cannot we could be living under Lenin or Moscow's rule right now, or Japan. So thank God we're living in America where we could talk about it. We could have went the other way. What I'm just saying is that perspectives are so different, right? Because the people there, the Koreans and Japanese, the Taiwanese people I know that was there, or the Vietnamese, they don't feel this way. They do not feel this way, that we prospered together, that U.S. let this country build, let them keep their culture. They felt like it was meddling, it was influence of the country. Let me translate this really quick, because I know your response will be very interesting.
Yeah, I will.
所以刚刚Jim讲到的，我立刻就不同，你看不同的立场的观点嘛，我们都是移民，他的祖先来美国早，我们来的晚，但是因为他的生长环境不一样，对他来说，他刚提到事情，他说美国在2次世界大战之后，帮助国家重建，就算是战败国帮他重建，然后双赢，然后保持他们的文化传统，希望大家都能够经济都能够很稳定，这一点我就很不同意了。你看看美国从第二次大战之后，为的是什么？是为了要利用亚洲的国家去阻止俄共苏联的这个影响力。重建日本也是为了要对抗俄国。然后他刚提到尼克森总统在70年代跟这个中国建交，这个当然历史大的这个眼光看来这是好事，但是有没有想过，当年打第一次大战的盟国是中华民国台湾？他们是背弃了盟友，偷摸摸的在背后偷偷的制造了秘密的协定，然后欺骗了、背叛了这些。那时候联合国很多国家并不赞同，但是在美国施压之下，所以他说这个双赢啊，至少没有。在越南有双赢吗？你如果问越南、韩国，在中国这些受苦受难的，你会觉得说哇，美国好，那种每个国家立场都不一样，每个人民的立场都会不一样。你没有在那边知道过那当地的历史，很难能够断定说到底对谁是双赢。So I just told the audience what we talked about earlier. 赢者Jim也讲了，历史是由赢家来写的，对不对？那在亚洲谁是赢家？在欧洲谁是赢家？我们这个在现在还没有办法断定。I said you said the winners decide history. History is written by winners, right? But in some
the winners write history. Yeah.
But in some countries, we can't decide who wins or not because it's still not set, right? This is not done. We can't really say in Vietnam who won or lost because we don't know yet, right? Enough time. I know in Korea, North and South Korea, we don't know either. But so you were saying about World War II, U.S. rebuilt countries, kept their culture. 还有美国致力了联合国、世界银行。北约公协 NATO World Bank 世界银行对他来说好像是帮助世界各地。对我来说，这都是美国的他的影响力，他的示范他的影响力去管制别国的。对我来说都是that it serves the interests of United States and Western European countries only. When we talk about World Bank, NATO, UN, Russia, China, these countries, Eastern Bloc countries. They will not agree with what we're saying, right? That this is created to create a new world order, to promote peace and prosperity. No, to them, this is a way for our country to exert our influence on the rest of the world.
You're talking about the United States?
Yeah, United States, because NATO, United Nations, World Bank, all these are controlled by United States.
Not really. No, we can debate that. But before you translated, you made reference to three places: Japan, Taiwan, and Vietnam. Let me respond to each of those very briefly. Mm-hmm. World War II was a catastrophe from many perspectives, including most especially the Japanese. And when General MacArthur oversaw the rebuilding of Japan and the creation of the new Japanese Constitution, a key element was that Japan would never have a military. It was written out of the Japanese Constitution, and the Japanese people agreed with that because they were so ashamed and they felt like they were not capable of managing their own military in the future. Now, here we are 70 years post-World War II. Some of that is beginning to change. But for 70 years, that has stood the test of time. And Japan has not explored its activity as it had all down through the prior centuries of invading Japan, the rest of China, and the rest of Asia. Taiwan, you mentioned about going around behind Taiwan when Nixon and Kissinger went to China for the first time. I'm very bitterly unhappy with that. And there was, my wife and I used to live in Washington, D.C., and there was a very famous comedian called Mark Russell. And in 1976 or 7, everybody in America understands the Chinese food Peking duck. Mark Russell said, "We have a new dish, Chinese. It's called Taiwan duck. First, you get a duck, and you promise you're going to take very good care of him, and then you cut off his head." And
I love this analogy. I didn't know this.
That's exactly what happened.
Because that's perfect. That's exactly what happened.
And I think the cause of democracy and the growth of prosperity in Asia, because of that, I'll call it ugly collateral damage, was set back a very long way, if not with permanent repercussions. A terrible situation. Vietnam, nobody won that war. Everybody lost. Everybody lost in so many ways. I was a young man in college, high school and college. 5 of my high school classmates were killed in Vietnam. For what? I was bitterly opposed to that war and still am opposed to its memory. And the United States has never learned the lessons. I was bitterly opposed for 2 huge reasons. There are probably many others. Number one, I could not figure out what a win would be. Who was ever going to win and how? Nobody could understand that and tell me how. And by the way, that applies to the Afghanistan war. It applies to the Iraqi war. What is a win? Nobody can tell me. Number 2, the government was lying to us every step of the way. The Tet Offensive, all the battles, the body bags, the counts, and about 1971, with the publishing of Daniel Ellsberg's Pentagon Papers, the whole attitude in the United States changed almost overnight. And it went from being a patriotic commitment to stopping communism in Southeast Asia to we can't wait to get out of there. And the United States is bearing that scar for ever since. So I'm glad you brought that up, and we have some healing to do. And that's also part of the U.S. history, which we'll talk about whenever we're ready.
We will have plenty of episodes to discuss this, because this generation, my generation, and the one after, has forgotten history, and history will repeat itself if we do not remember our mistakes.
And I'm afraid a lot of that is already
happening. This is why you say that we're healing and the government was lying. Well, to me, the past few administrations, or even this one, they could be lying to us too, just like they were lying to us then, just like Nixon was lying.
I happen to think that that same thing is going on in Afghanistan, and it was going on in Iraq.
I want to bring that up, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Jim, what you said earlier also, the greatest generation. My grandparents was the greatest generation. My parents were. I think you are the tail end of the greatest generation. Mm-hmm. After the war, you had to grow up during Korea War, Vietnam War. You guys knew freedom is not free. You know that it's a privilege, not a right to enjoy this. I think a lot of generations now has forgotten that. Americans, we have a bad reputation in Europe and Asia, right? Cocky and not wanting to understand the cultures, not respectful. Not your generation. So let me tell our audience what we just said, because that was very interesting. Even though we had such different perspectives earlier, on everything you just said, I could completely agree with you, because you understood what it meant for the people of the soldiers that fought with the U.S. during World War II, Taiwan, how they felt betrayed, or how Vietnamese people felt betrayed and lied, or how Americans are betrayed and lied upon, and what happened in Japan. I'm going to touch on Japan a little bit, because remember, when you bring up the issue of Japan and World War II and China-U.S. relations, it will always be a sore spot. And I don't care what kind of Chinese they are. They will always be unhappy with the result. And I'll explain to you why in a bit. 各位观众，刚刚我们提到那三点 ，Jim 都有回复，所以很绝，对不对？我们虽然立场非常不一样，但这3点有很多是我们有相同的。一，他说他提到这个当年中华民国这个 Nixon 在跟中国建交的时候。我刚刚讲了说，在大时代环境上回顾，其实对中国的这个1亿多人口，这是对华人来说这是好事，迟早要发生的。但是那个时候对中华民国台湾是很伤痛，也是盟友，然后背叛的羁绊的盟友。他也同意，他觉得这个他提了一个例子，说他的一个很有名的 comedian， 一个说相声的一个喜剧的，他说他那时候开玩笑说北京鸭跟台湾的差别，台湾鸭那时候台湾的烤鸭。拿出来好好的呵护，好好的养，然后等到要吃就把头斩断了，就表示说这就是背叛的盟友。他提到日本，他说日本因为美国的关系，日本维护了他这70年来没有武力啊，没有这个攻击性的这个武装的这个军事系统，然后都很安分守己。这点我们不同意，等一下我来跟他讲。然后讲到越南，说他自己本身就5个同学在越南越战的时候去世了。对Jim这个年代，越战是很伤痛的。所以这美国的好处在这里，承认政府骗了大家，利用这个扣红帽，利用这个什么爱国主义，然后去侵犯别的国家。然后他知道政府在骗人，所以整个这个舆论，整个美国的舆论都改变了。然后所以事实证明了越战是失败的。刚才也提到了阿富汗 （Afghanistan） 跟伊拉克，这都是美国外交政策失败跟干预别的国家的失败。So everything we just said, see, I'm really astonished that we could go all the way around and come back and it's the same thing that we feel the same about this. Yet there's so many minute differences. Now, everything you said about Vietnam, Japan, Taiwan, Afghanistan, Iraq, I feel like we're leading down the same path with this escalation between China or Russia, even though we know Russia meddled in the last election. But with China, it's leading down the McCarthyism, where it's create a false enemy because they're coming up. Because I very firmly believe in our influence. It's our soft power. Everybody drinks Coca-Cola in this world. Everybody has McDonald's. Is there any Chinese product that other people use? TikTok is just an app which has no culture affiliated. You know, no matter what country you're from, when you think of the United States, it's freedom. It's beaches, it's New York, it's Coca-Cola, you could be whoever you can, you could be who you want, and anyone can make it, right? It's still the case now, right? Right? Would you say that?
Well, not only would I say that, but you're beginning to get into some of the differences which separate the value system of the United States and the value system of the leadership in China, the CCP, et cetera. Let me explain a couple of things. It's important for, I think, our Chinese audiences to understand some aspects of the American perspective. Again, back to World War II. After World War II, the Soviet Union took over half of Europe, the eastern half of Europe. And it did that by what we have called communist imperialism. And they did that for the benefit of mother country Russia. And a lot of people in Hungary, in Poland, Czechoslovakia, all the way down to Bulgaria and Romania suffered greatly. And so what happened was the United States built up this deep, deep suspicion of communism, its economic position of socialism, and its government position of totalitarianism. That's what the original excuse for going into Vietnam was, to stop the domino theory of continuing one country after another. Same thing in Korea at the time. Okay. That attitude pervades US foreign policy relative to China. Why? Because China is a communistic country. People are suspicious of it. American people are suspicious of its economic system, its governmental system from top down, et cetera, et cetera. The United States believes in individual freedom. It believes in free markets. It believes in prosperity, opportunity, and government accountability. We in the United States, and you know from being an American yourself, Jimmy, and growing up here, we have the three branches of government to make sure that there's always balance. We have the Constitution, which protects individual rights. And we have what's called federalism, where we have the national government, we have state governments, and we have local governments. And power, if you will, and policy making are intentionally distributed throughout, so there is accountability. Very different than the singular top-down leadership that exists in China.
You know, it's like giving me a review of my middle school and high school government class.
The civics class, okay.
But you know, but that's what's so interesting, because unless you're educated here, it's very hard to explain to someone. Because now with what's going on the last 3 years, not to mention any names, our soft power, our image has been deteriorated all over the world, especially with China. I have a lot of Chinese friends. We talk about this in other media outlets all the time. People in China are looking down on us now before they look up at us. They still do, because think about where's the elites, the people that are wealthy, the elites, where do they go? They go to the US, they go to Western countries, right? Why? If you have faith in your own country, why? But see, with this escalation, Chinese people love face, 面子, okay?
Right.
Keep poking, and they keep attacking them. In the end, they're going to be defensive, right? Any country would, and then now they're going to say, well, what democracy? Look at who you guys elected. Look at your pandemic control. Look at how many people's dying and sick. Look at your economy. I mean, it's hard to defend unless you grew up here. You understand the basis. It's through trial and error. Our democracy is still young, 200 some years. Went through civil war, went through all kinds of civil unrest. We don't just get here in one day. We don't expect other countries to get here in one day. No. I apologize, Jim. We gotta like the way I can talk to you. We have so much to talk about, but the fact I have to stop and translate it. So
okay, stop and translate. And then you said some things I want to come right back to.
Yes. Okay. So 刚刚 Jim 也是在讲说这个中国这个跟美国的这个差别。美国有这个 checks and balances， 美国有这个分权，对不对？balance of power， 平衡这个权利。那我就反讽一下，我说过去这3年有吗？对不对？美国这个民主是一个笑话，但是美国民主是很多年建成的。这个美式民主、西型民主，并不代表 applies to any country， 不表示它能够在任何国家都适用。那他刚刚也提到了说，这个苏联俄共的这个影响力在东欧，在2次世界大战之后，东欧这个冷战期间，所带给的这个人民的这个不便，死了很多人。然后讲到这个，其实他刚提到，其实亚洲不一样，对不对？苏联的这个跟中国的这个影响力，但是我要跟他讲，就是说，他说的这个共产党，中国的我们讲中国跟讲共产党，其实你讲的历史，但是中国的共产党现在已经不一样了。而且我要问他说，等一下问他说，如果是这样子的话，现在中国的这个网络很发达，大家也可以开始接收到别的这个世界上的新闻。在中国，大部分的人民是对于执政党非常的满意。也认为是非要这个执政，没有这个执政党是不行的，把中国从贫穷带到发展国家。 这点我们不可以不承认。So I just told our audience, Jim, that we have to admit that China's people has access to news from other parts. It's not like North Korea. China used to be like that, but not anymore. But yet the approval rating for the Communist Party, see, I don't even want to say communist. I want to say their ruling party, okay? China's ruling party. Because China could be ruled by other parties, hopefully one day. That doesn't have to be this one, right? So this ruling party has really high approval rating. Some believe that without this particular ruling party, they will not get out of poverty and this and that. But we also admit that history did show, like you said, about Russia, right? USSR, what happened in Europe. What CCP did in Asia during Cultural Revolution, all their droughts and all the wars against Vietnam and what happens in Laos, what happens in Cambodia, North Korea, a lot of people died. So when you see this fear of Red China or Red Russia, that fear is ingrained in us, right? But to the people from there, we are the enemy. They've been groomed to think that we are influencing, and they do have their perspective too to back them up, i.e. Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, Iraq, right? So this is very hard to there's no absolute right or wrong when it comes to these. No. I want to hear what you're saying about what you were going to say about what we were talking about earlier before.
Yeah, let me mention just before you went to translate, you said obviously some very important things about, first one, you said the America's prestige is declining around the world. And obviously that is terribly troublesome to us in substance. But I think the reason for that is a symbolism. We elected a new president 4 years ago who commands all media attention. And so the symbol of Mr. Trump, he is the man that so many people in the United States and around the world love to hate. And so he has become a lightning rod for all kinds of symbolism and criticism of what's going on. I would request our friends all around the world, including China, to look around and past and through that. And let me just give you a couple of examples of why the United States is ever stronger than it's ever been. Number one, what the Federal Reserve is doing to support monetary systems all around the globe by providing liquidity, by providing dollars, by financing foreign trade, et cetera, et cetera. The Federal Reserve is beyond compare in terms of its strength of money and fiscal and monetary intelligence. Secondly, our university system. We educate the leadership of the world. People come here in every way, economists, scientists, technology, even diplomats. And it's been that way for a very long time, and I hope it continues. That system is somewhat under attack here in the United States now, but I hope it continues.
Under attack? Because look at what the administrations did. Persecuting scientists and researchers in academia, claiming they're spies and kicking them out without charges. We talked about last episode what happened in the medical center here. There was no proof. You know, it's a witch hunt. It's a witch hunt. And so prestige, what prestige? And then Federal Reserve, the 美国联邦储蓄银行. Yes, there's a lot of monetary help for countries, but that doesn't apply to China or Eastern Bloc countries.
Well,
it applies to countries that are beneficial to us, strategic partners to us.
I'm about to give you something that does help China.
Thank you.
Okay, and that is our economic demand. The fact that the United States consumes so much industrially and commercially with individual consumers. What would China be today? What would its economy be today without its massive export markets, most of which comes to the United States? And it's not just economic trade balance, et cetera, and foreign currency earnings. It's the technology that comes along with that. It's a number of things. And to follow along that, one of the things the United States has always hoped is that China would continue its march to economic prosperity and hopefully over time become more democratic. We're very satisfied with the first piece of that. and we're still hopeful for the second piece of that.
I'm smiling not because I am laughing at what you said. I'm smiling because you said the exact same thing I said a few weeks ago on a different show. Look, this is sad too when you bring this up. Yes, the first part, economic. It's actually, to me, is mutually beneficial. China is a huge country that they consume a lot of tuna, right?
Sure.
They needed U.S.'s help 30 years ago to produce parts,代工, right? 中国需要美国的时候，但是3年以后，现在是风水轮流转。The tide has changed. Some people in China or Asia would say is that like U.S. needs China more than China needs U.S. China is a huge power that produces a lot of, they have a lot of natural resources too. But we could debate that later because different perspective. But I do agree with you. There's some people that say that we have spoiled China. We have given them too much tax credits, too much economic assistance because of our corporations are so greedy that we want to explore this market and that the stock prices, what matters, that this dream, I had this hope too, and people say that we're naive. Yeah, give them Coca-Cola and McDonald's and maybe they will turn to democracy and believe in the people's rights, that everyone has a voice. It sure didn't work out that way, did it? It sure didn't work out in Vietnam. It did not work out in any of these former communist countries, none of them. But there are examples we could use that does work, because this is not unfair to say that it never works. It does work. It worked in Korea, it worked in Japan, Singapore. A lot of countries that started out 40 years ago as the same as Vietnam or China. What I'm saying is, it's very hard to apply. It is very, very hard. And I'm not disagreeing with you on this at all. Every point you made is valid. It's just where it applies to and who benefited from it and who didn't. And 刚刚 Jim 讲的说这个美国这个，因为我刚刚不赞成他的说法。他说美国银行啊，这个国家银行啊，世界银行这个到处贷款啊，帮助人民，这是只是对我来说只是对美国的这个有利益的才会借钱。他说，但是中美这个贸易过去这30年帮助中国脱贫啊什么的，这点我承认。然后他说很多这个借口就是如果有引进西方的产品、科技，让中国人民能够了解到民主啊怎么样，那这点我没有同意，对不对？因为事实来说并不是的，只是反而会增加，因为每个国家都有自己的国家的认同感，跟他的民族的这个使命感，跟这个自尊，所以 it does not work。这个用这个经济来改变，之前有这样子想过，过去很多年美国这个外交政策都是这样子。So I just told our audience that yeah, for many years our foreign policy was built on that foundation that opened up the economy, bring in our soft power, our soft influence, our music, our culture, and hopefully it'll change. Yeah, but it worked in some places, and some places didn't work. I hate to keep translating off you. Could you go ahead and continue? You were going to mention something important to refute what I was saying earlier. Oh, you mentioned university and college.
Yeah.
刚刚 Jimmy 提到说，美国另外很重要的实力，就是因为他不同有的说法。我说美国的实力在倒退，下一个世纪我觉得是中国的世纪，全世界人都要讲中文。他觉得说，美国的大学啊，跟研究的这个中心啊，都是全世界各地的顶尖的人才，甚至外交人员都在美国训练的。当年是这样子没有错，但是你看川普最近是几年，甚至过几个月，到处这个去扣红帽，把很多顶尖的这个科学家，尤其是我们华人、中国人，都驱逐出境了，要么就是扣罪名，说他们在偷商业间谍，最后并没有事实的证据来，有几个少数的。但是如果你要说以色列呢，那苏联呢，不都哪一个国家不在互相竞争？ So I told our audience that you mentioned university, college. A lot of leaders of foreign countries are educated here. A lot of the military is trained here, not just researchers and scientists, right?
No, of all kinds.
Yeah,
of all kinds.
Some of them took our knowledge and went back and became dictators, or some of them did use it for good. But in the end, to bring a country, like you said, starting from War II, where the world was in ruin, the entire world. To build that up in less than a century, it's a tall task. Yeah. There's a lot of different influences that pull, right? And the Cold War was also very hurtful. I told our audience that I don't think the top of the line talents in the world come here now because of the stigma. We know that before there was a free flow of information, and now because the fact that I did agree with you that maybe we gave too much, right? We would have to be able to keep an open mind. We cannot just be one-sided and say, no, what we did with China is fair. And well, isn't there a possibility that we gave too much? That's why it led to this. Would you say that?
Well, I'm not sure that I can make that judgment. I do think China has prospered at a far greater rate than anybody ever could have expected in 1949, okay, and where China is today. But my hope, my observation and my hope is history continues. That history never ends. We continue to develop. And I think those of us in leadership positions, in business, in government, even in families, need to lead by example. And one of the things that people say about America roots for the underdog, but America follows the top dog. And so whoever is the leader has a very special responsibility to behave ethically. And in the United States, one of the very important things, and we're often compared to the Middle East in this regard. In the Middle East, when somebody wins even a democratic election or a dictator topples another dictator, they rule themselves by what's called majoritarianism. In other words, the winner can take all. In the United States, we don't do it that way. In the United States, the first responsibility of the leader is to keep people safe. The second responsibility is to allow the majority to protect the rights of the minorities. Okay? And that is something very important that I'd like to spend maybe next time on. The United States in the early part and the middle part of the 20th century, 100 years ago, began to look back. And we said, we have an ugly history. We have violated human rights of our native Indian population, of slavery, people from Africa, and many people from Asia who helped build the West Coast of the United States. Politely, they're called indentured servants. There are many other terms that are not so polite.
Railroad workers from China, yeah.
But the second half of the 20th century was all about civil rights and restoring, trying to make up for some of those ugly elements of our past. And I think that's worth some discussion.
We'll discuss this definitely, because there are so many points made that are beneficial to people understanding, because what they're seeing on TV is not what you're seeing. With burning, the looting, BLM, with all the innocent minority victims being brutalized, which as Americans, we have a huge difference on that too. Yeah. We were going to continue this. See, today's topic, you see how it started out. We're going to talk about fundamentally the difference in governance. But yet, to talk about that, we have to talk about history.
You have to get there first.
We have to talk about different countries' perspectives, what Russia was doing, what USSR. I mean, it is so deep and so multi-layered that this is. I'd love to continue this, Jim, but sadly we have to go. But next week we'll
I'm sure we're probably beyond time right now.
Yeah, so we're gonna continue talking about this. Let me go ahead and translate what you just said the last one before we go. 我刚刚Jim讲到的就是说，这个美国呢，还是再怎么样，在西方世界是领头羊，就是他的这个他要带领这个世界的舆论。当然，我们可以不同意，我们就为什么苏联不可以，为什么中国不可以？但是当然了，老美当然是要讲到自己国家不同的观点，但是 Jim 是全世界都走过，所以至少他算是他是有世界观的，所以这一点很重要。同样的，他对中国的友善度绝对是比普通的 average American 平均美国人他会高很多，因为他去过中国，他也知道中美关系一定要好，因为这对整个世界都有关系。So I was telling our audience that you do not represent what the average American think. Most of Americans, especially Texans, do not really care. You won't have the time to talk about international politics or what's going on in the country. You're very unique because you travel the world. You know international commerce. You know how important it is, how mutually beneficial it is. But the average American do not think like you or me. Remember that. But we do want our audience to know, especially our audience that are Chinese. we want peace. We want to have prosperity. That's the one thing we both agree on. So we want to solve. We want our people to be able to solve this dilemma, this escalation that is unnecessary. Would you say? Even if I even think that maybe we gave too much during the trade imbalance, maybe we gave too much in trying to make money off China, that we gave in to the corporations, that we forgot fundamentally what our values are. What we want to achieve in the world is to spread democracy. Am I right? Would you say that? Would you?
Right.
You don't have to agree completely, but I mean,
I think that's worth some discussion next time.
OK， 我们下一期再谈这个美国这个到底是不是这个西方这个所谓的自由民主的这个影响力，是不是用经济上交换的，是不是给了太多？各位观众，希望大家在这个疫情之中，大家再继续保重。我们休斯顿疫情越来越严重，请大家一定要小心。Pandemic is getting worse and worse in Houston, and where we are in Texas. I just wish our audience.
Yeah, I get the feeling it's kind of bottomed out, and it may be turning now, but the data is so bad, I don't think we can make any judgments.
Yeah, we just hope our audience stays safe, stay healthy, and we hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
各位观众，
谢谢。Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.